Welcome back, folks. This is an extremely special episode. It marks the 2-year anniversary of Tapasya Loading, and I can't think of a better guest to celebrate that event with our first returning founding guest, my brother, Rockson. Now, when I say my brother, Rockson, that's not just a figure of speech. This guy's actually been a true brother. And it's interesting, you'll hear us talk about this. We've had a relationship as friends and colleagues for over 10 years now. It's kind of stunning because we've never actually met in person. It's always been online. Just goes to show how powerful this medium can actually be. And I'm not going to give away too much. You should just listen to the history of our relationship, the way it's been through the course of this conversation. But I just want to say, this is a guy you really want to follow in this day and age. This is someone you really want to follow. So please make sure you go and take a look at his links, take a look at the work he's doing, because there is no one else I'd be recommending to my audiences with so much confidence as I would Rockson. This podcast is brought to you by the Holistic Musician Academy and tlrights.com. One of the biggest ways you can make us sustain this is go to a podcast platform of your choice, ideally Apple Podcasts. Go review us, follow us. It helps to spread the word of this podcast and take it out there and spread the message, which is all what this is about. Share us on your Instagram stories, tag us. It goes a long way to making this happen. Believe me, it's kind of the only thing that makes this happen in a way, at least on a long-term basis anyway. All right, without much further ado, Rockson. Hello, fellow beings. Welcome to Tapasya Loading, a safe space to attempt honest, raw and authentic conversation in homage to the ancient act of stoking a sacred fire. And we are rolling. Welcome, Tayo, man.
Hey, it's a pleasure. I love being on the other side of this.
Yeah, I can imagine. For a guy who started off with podcasting at a time, it wasn't even the huge thing it is today. What an exciting time it must be for someone like you to see the fruit of your efforts.
No, it's humbling. I definitely believed in it a long time ago.
Indeed. Yeah. Just to clarify for my listeners what we're talking about, Tayo already has way over 500, I'm guessing close to 1,000 episodes out now on this podcast.
Yeah, I wish. I'm in the 600s now, okay. But I started back in 2014, August 2014.
Exactly. And I happen to have had the honor to have been one of your initial guests at a time. I wasn't even sure what a podcast is. And you were one of the founding guests on mine, which is nowhere close to the quantity of content you've put out. This will be my 50th, I think.
Nice.
Cheers. And you know what's interesting? My mum, every now and then she'll be curious about the guests to come onto this podcast. She's not sure exactly what it is either, but she was like, okay, so who are you interviewing today? And it's funny she uses the word interview because I prefer thinking of these as conversations rather than interviews, really.
Fair enough.
While describing you, I realized that, wow, you know, I ended up saying, this is actually a really old friend of mine. This is someone I've known for over 10 years.
Can you imagine?
I know, right? And someone who's actually, by the way, I realized, played a very, very major role in the trajectory of the things. And I feel like I owe it to let you know about this. You were the guy who really kind of helped me unpack the entire TCK journey in a way. You were the first person to have had me speak about it on the record. You're the first. You're my go-to guy when I want to understand racial bias. You're literally the person I orient myself according to, because you're the manner in which you teach and explain that specific dynamic, especially in the current zeitgeist, is right on point. And I have friends who keep thanking me at this point for pointing them towards your page.
Oh wow, thank you.
Indeed, and. Apart from that, this is actually the 4th podcast we're recording. You're the first guest to make a reappearance on my podcast, by the way, which I think is extremely appropriate. Excuse me. I couldn't have thought of a better candidate. And so a long story cut short, I'm honored and very excited to have you on again tonight. Well, tonight for me.
Well, I mean, pleasure's mine. That's the beauty of time difference, right? So, you're always in different parts of the world. But I think I came across you in one of the TCK groups that was populating at the time, and I thought I got to have him on. And yeah, it's been a pleasure to see how your career is continuing to grow.
Likewise, man. I'm a fan at this point, and it was very interesting to see how our paths kept crossing over the web every now and then. I noticed you were on Jen's podcast recently as well.
Yeah,
and Jen Mohindra, who also is a major contributor in the whole TCK universe, and that was a nice feeling too. Just a reminder of how kindred spirits kind of figure out a way to find each other.
100%. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. I think when you talk about the whole TCK concept and identity and figuring out who you are in multiple parts of the world, there's a benefit of understanding, your mental health, your way of belonging, and I feel like the world today is becoming more, nuanced, and anyone that can find solace in learning how to tell the stories, in a world that tries to define who you are in multiple times, I think there's a lot of benefit in that.
Indeed. I'd go as far as to say not investing a little bit of time in understanding those nuances is probably not even an option anymore.
Yeah. It seems like it's black and white, binary options.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. I've been listening to a lot of your podcast episodes, by the way, and that's another thing I've been in some deep admiration of. It's not just the quantity, but the quality you've managed to retain over the years. Every guest, and I see the growth in not just the ever-expanding list of followers you have on social media, but also the topics you address, the spaces you go to. I hear a difference in Ty Rockson from 10 years ago and Ty Rockson today, and that's very inspiring.
Yeah, thank you. I think for me, I was in the process of finding my voice, and one of the things I've become even more unapologetic about is, just injustice. I've always hated it, even growing up initially under dictatorships. But I find that if you have a platform, it at least to me, I feel like it's your responsibility to use as much of your platform as you can to highlight what needs to be highlighted. And so I've just become, I guess, more into that aspect of things.
And how's that journey been?
I mean, it's not come without its challenges. You
Exactly.
definitely, with the line of work I'm in, diversity, anti-racism, inclusion, equity, there's a lot of hate. Mm-hmm. You definitely deal with fear from family and parents. My parents are, they're the typical Nigerian parents in the sense that they want to make sure that they're, that you keep everything inside and you don't tell the world any of those things. But at the same time, I found it rewarding because, of the messages you get from people who find a vehicle to have a voice. The thing that I will say, though, is within the past 10 years, I've definitely made therapy a big part of my routine. Mm-hmm. So I can't say that if I didn't have therapy that I'll be well, because there've been multiple times when, my panic attacks will flare up because of what's going on. And if I didn't have any coping mechanism, it could have been problematic.
Yeah.
So
I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you. Yeah, on the very much in the same boat. And again, for my listeners, I think one of the episodes I happened to have the privilege of being a guest on Ty's podcast was specifically in relation to mental health. In fact, my journey with it and my journey with therapy, and that's another topic I really. Ought to be open about my admiration for, and the manner in which you've gone about it. You've been very open and very empowering in the manner in which you've talked about your journey with the same. And hats off, man. No,
thank you. I used to keep it in, and for me, someone like me, it's funny. I always tell my parents, I thought initially I had to be like my dad, more stoic, just keep it yourself. But I was actually more like my mom. My mom and I would tell you they were so similar. And my mom is very emotional, and I'm very emotional. But when I was growing up, the idea of being emotional was like, what are you doing? That's not manly.
Yeah.
And so I always, I played all the sports. I wanted to be an athlete growing up, but I was also this emotional artist, a vocal artist. And those two worlds didn't seem to make sense to people. And I used to repress a lot of my emotions. And one of the things that the podcast helped me to do was to vocalize a lot of thoughts I had written down or just kept hidden. And so when I kept getting triggered, I just thought, I got to figure out how to talk about this or share it, because I feel like I'm not the only one going through this. But if I don't do it, I would be a hypocrite, because I'm bringing on guests who are being vulnerable. I'm not being vulnerable myself. So, that was also part of the catalyst of that.
That very much makes sense. I talk openly about the fact as well that, deciding to curate a podcast of my own, it was very much a result of therapy as well, in a way. It started off, funny story, but when I noticed that while listening back to the recording sessions I'd done with my therapist, I have to, that has an incredibly healing, not just healing, but educational experience. It was just worth, you're right. It kind of hinted at, the potential of the same. And at some point, I found myself wondering, why don't I do more of this? This is clearly a very, very powerful tool. And not to make my guest just a tool for therapy, that's just one angle. But now that you mention it, point being, I realized that there is a very direct relation between the two as well. And these podcasts go a long way in, benefiting my mental health in the long run. I wouldn't want to say I'm dependent on them per se, but they're a very powerful tool, and what's the word I'm looking for, in supporting me on this journey.
100%. Because with podcasting or conversations in general, when you have conversations about real issues that one goes through, whether it's triggers or things that are aspirational and inspirational, I find at least one of the things that podcasts help you do is they allow you to unpack. And sometimes with guests, you can find a mirror of yourself. Someone can give you language to a feeling that you've been having for a long time, but didn't quite know what to do in terms of expression. And then once you come across that, it's like, whoa, it's great. And it's the same sort of thing with a therapist will listen to you, and then they'll say, oh, I feel like that's, anxiety, or that's this. And you're like, I feel comfortable now that I know what this is. And then I can go down the rabbit hole of this, because I can investigate it and see others who have dealt with it, and also find my own coping skill with that. And that's what I find with interviews as well, if you really craft them the right way.
Hard relate. Totally with you on there. Do you remember how you felt towards the beginning of your podcast journey? What was it like, and how do you compare it to what it's like today?
I was not comfortable. I hated my voice. I really did. I had a very inferiority complex, because I always thought that I had a soft, whiny voice.
Really? Huh.
I know. People always laugh at me when they say, your voice sounds great. But this is one of the things that happens. It's like body dysmorphia. But one of the things that I was proud of, at least for myself, was I still put out the episodes. But I remember listening to those episodes, and I was like, ugh. But then I was like, no, I committed to it. And I've put out all these interviews, and I set out an intention. But I could also see that I was, figuring it out. The first time I was doing my podcast, it was solely based on TCK's, Third Culture Kids. Mm-hmm. And then, one of the things that I've allowed myself to do is to grow throughout that. And so I have Third Culture Kids on, but I talk a lot to change makers. I bring on a lot of business experts. And the whole idea of Nomads now, to me, is more someone who's willing to travel with their mind Right? Yeah, that was not my first intention. But now I think with life, and I hope anyone else who is listening to this, whenever you start something, don't allow yourself to evolve past that. And so now I find comfort in my voice. I find comfort in even the spontaneity of interviews, because I found that my style is more conversational. And so, some podcasts that they like having a set list of questions. And for me, I just need to know a few things about you. I can do research, and I find that I'm pretty good at, making a conversation out of that. And so I've now gravitated towards that type of format in terms of my interviews.
Very close to my heart. That's pretty much my modus operandi as well. But then I've also observed the best. I'm hinting at you now.
Oh, stop it!
No, I'm genuinely serious here, by the way. You literally, you're genuinely one of the most biggest influences in my podcasting approach. I'm not kidding. It's amidst other reasons, because you're literally the first person I did a podcast with as a guest. So you're literally the person who even pretty much kind of familiarized me with what a podcast even is. I mean, I've done like radio interviews and stuff like that earlier on, but that's a very different vibe, which is why I also kind of insist on trying and explaining to a lot of my guests or peers or colleagues about the whole idea that these are not interviews per se. Sure, that would be the term that's often used, but they're conversations. And secondly, I'm not a journalist, and I don't really have any intentions of the same. That being said, I know that's a somewhat controversial point of view, because, at the end of the day, it kind of qualifies as an interview by someone who ends up being a journalist by default. But
right.
I'd like to think podcasting is a bit of a different art, generally speaking. What would you say to that?
Well, I think that's the beauty of podcasting. You certainly have the media gravitating towards interviews, right? Using it as part of their platform. Wall Street Journal, all these established media platforms are now having their journalists create those type of things. Then you have the narrative types of podcasts. You have the single ones. I think to your point, podcasts can be more than just interviews. It can be more than just journalists, right? You don't have to go to school to launch a podcast. You don't have to necessarily have any qualification, really. You have to have an audience. Right. And so I think that's the difference. And I think with podcasts, you're allowed to mess up more. You're allowed to be more creative, and your audience can, they can grow with you. They can figure out the quirks of it. But if you are in the traditional settings, one of the things you have to be mindful of is, well, this is before commercial. This is the timing. We only have you for this, for 2 minutes before this comes out. So, so maybe that plays a little bit into the freedom of that. And so to that, I would say, there's a difference there. It's almost like with streaming. When you think about streaming platforms versus traditional cable TV or any of these things, sometimes, before Netflix decides to add ads, because I heard that they're exploring that, the differentiator was you can just go on here anytime, start, pause, binge, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then the difference with the other TV, like, well, you have to wait the next week, and then you have to deal with like 10 commercials and things like that. And so there's a difference, and then there's similarities, but I think there's more freedom with podcasts.
Indeed. Pretty much. I tend to compare it primarily due to my background in music. I tend to kind of subconsciously compare it to independent artists and signed artists. Because once you're signed, you're signed, there's a whole bunch of protocol you have to adhere to, right? That's set by the labels or the managers or the A&R team you're working with. Whereas when you're independent, you can just basically put out your content, and music is at the end of the day also content. I mean, at least from a digital point of view, in any manner you want. Now, that could be a good thing or a bad thing. There's lots of independent music out there which is, not as thoroughly researched and performed, let's just say. But then again, there are also a lot of mammoth musicians, just utilizing that freedom to put out their work sans any compromise whatsoever. The minute these people go on to get signed, though, and start getting noticed, a lot of things change. And I've been on both sides. I've been signed as well at another part of my career. And it is an entirely different system. You can't really just do everything on your own terms, which is fair enough. But the rawness of it does take a hit.
No, I can see that. I can see that. And even now, I'm starting to notice a lot of, if you're on TikTok or any social media platform, you have all these musicians who are building an audience, and then the big question for them is, will I stay independent, or will I go with a label? And Indeed. I see a lot of arguments, for those.
Indeed. I feel like I'm talking way too much about myself. I feel like, I know
it's the opposite.
I know for a fact that we could literally talk for hours, but I also know for a fact that you're a very busy man, and I do want to respect your time. And I do have very specific topics I would want to pick your very expert brain on. Okay. So with your permission, I'm going to dive in one of mine first.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, man. Well, the TCK thing, right? I'd be extremely honored if you would do us the honor to be the first person to really unpack this entire I almost said syndrome, my apologies, this entire phenomena. Wow, that must have been a Freudian slip of sorts. It's not a syndrome, folks, but you are an official expert on third culture kids. You've done tons of research. You're a full-blown TCK yourself.
Yes.
For our audiences who have no clue what that acronym stands for, what Third Culture Kid stands for, would you give us a primer? Yeah.
So a Third Culture Kid, or TCK, for acronym, and sometimes people will say TCI individual because maybe they want to take the adolescent part out of it, but it usually refers to people, who were raised or grew up or spent the formative periods of their lives outside of cultures other than their parents, right? Or outside of their nationality or their passport country. And you find this with many people. It could be with a lot of missionary kids, army kids. I was a diplomatic kid. My father was a diplomat. Or people who just found themselves being migrants, people. Yeah. Yes. a lot of immigrants will have that. And many people, in my opinion, I love the definition to expand to many people who just, even though they've spent a lot of time in one country, they know what it's like to be, say, if I'm using myself, Nigerian at home and then whatever, German outside.
Right. Indeed.
Yeah. And some of the things that are synonymous with third culture kids are, this idea of code switching.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Tell us more about code switching. That's another time I would love for you to help me unpack on the record.
Yeah. Well, with code switching, it's basically, I really think it's a linguistic form. And people say it too now. I'm glad people are saying that because it involves what it's like to be, quote unquote, to be German here, be Nigerian at home, to use that. And so it's the practice of alternative between two or more languages or variations in a conversation. So I can imagine if you're speaking to your Indian friends and you're speaking to your German friends in the same room, you could switch to different accents, different tones, or even use slangs in the same conversation, and you go back and forth. And then you're like, oh, wait, what happened? Yeah, I'm just speaking English. Yeah. So in Nigeria, we have something called Pidgin English. So it's broken English, essentially. A lot of countries have their own version, their Creole, their all that type of stuff. And so maybe you don't want someone to understand something. You just say something right there, and then you switch back and forth. And then for many instances, depending on the power dynamics, it's often used as a means of survival. So here in the United States,
Indeed.
There's some. Yeah, here in the United States, people will say, "Are you using your white voice?" or something like that. Because if someone might not understand, they might think your background. I always hate when people use colorful voices, but they do say that, right? Where they will say, "You sound ghetto," or "You sound too hood," or "You sound this," and so you then learn maybe with the type of voice they want is that. And so you know how to do that. And then once they leave the office, it's a different tone. And the reason why I said survival is because it could be the difference between you getting a job opportunity or not.
Right.
In that case, it's not whether your qualifications match. It's like, I don't know. You sound like you're from somewhere else that I'm not comfortable with. And so it plays a huge role in multiple things. And I do believe power dynamics play a role in that. And then it went into amongst your friends. It can be fun, but there's an element of in-group and out-group depending on the power dynamics for sure.
Yeah. Thank you for that very elaborate and accurate description. Here's something I want to delve a little deeper into, which are the mental health aspects of code switching. It's been proven to result in a form of cultural schizophrenia, which in the long term, and I want to address this because I've been subject to the same. In the long term, it can be very confusing eventually down the run to kind of make a choice on, okay, who am I really? It's one thing to use something as a coping mechanism to survive, and another down the line to really make a call on, okay, what really is my authentic accent? What do I really sound like? And how do I really want to come across to people regardless of what the consequences are? What have your experiences been with this?
You know what? This is so fascinating. And I need to do more research on that part, but I'll share my experience. So while I don't know the role it can play in schizophrenia or any other mental health issue, I do know what role it played in my mental health. And so I'll go from that lens.
Yes, please.
I remember when I was 10 to 15-ish, where I went to this American international school in Burkina Faso. So it's in a French-speaking country in West Africa. And I'm from Nigeria, an English-speaking country in West Africa.
Right.
I had a very, very strong Nigerian accent. And so I go into this, American international school. So I'm the skinny Nigerian kid with a thick Nigerian accent in a French-speaking country. And so they speak French, but in the school I'm in, everyone sounds different. And, when I talk, it's like, this guy, don't like the sound of your voice. You're 10, 11, and then all I would do would be I would watch movies and everything, and I'll be trying to repeat everything they're saying so I could sound like that. And it took me a long time, and then I'll start reading out loud, and I'll watch my R's and my T's. This is just what I internalized as a 10-year-old. So I eventually got good at that. And then, when I came back to Nigeria, it became, people thought I was American. And so they would now say, well, are you really Nigerian? I don't know if you're really Nigerian because you sound this way. And I in both instances, I'm still this person that knows all these cultures, but the sound of my voice is basically my passport into the entry and identity. And so I got really frustrated when I graduated, when I was 17, because it played a role into a big part of my depression through middle school and a lot of my anxiety. I started getting panic attacks when I was 15, 16, I think. Yeah. And looking back, I can see the seeds of that. And so a lot of it was I didn't know who I needed to be. And I felt like I had to overcompensate when my identity was challenged and so much. And so when I eventually came to the United States, I remember signing this virtual contract with myself. And I said, the thing about me and my experience is that I am all of them and I don't need to silo each of them. And so once I embrace that I'm all and everything at once, I can meet someone, I can understand, understand all the Nigerian nuances and the larger part, West African nuances. I can also understand some of American culture because of my background. It freed me and it let me become more myself, if I will. I used to hide a lot of myself because I felt like I was, I don't know, not Nigerian enough for some people or not this enough for some people.
Bingo.
Yeah. That's how I played my mental health. I was very depressed for a long time.
I can intimately relate. I think the point I'm the most curious about at this point in my life is that fine line between conformity and just giving in. Conformity can be all right to a certain degree. I say that with caution. But when you're doing it at the cost of your own well-being, that's where that starts becoming risky. With your permission, I'd like to share some of my experiences, which are very similar to yours.
Please. Yes.
And I remember I was talking about it vaguely on that podcast we did 10 years back. I was like all out bullied for my accent when my parents returned to India. And there's a whole colonial history behind it, especially the city my parents decided to move back to in our ancestral country. It was the peak of, colonial, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, that's where all the shit went down, man. Calcutta. Calcutta. Calcutta was the capital of the British India. And so the residue that remains till today in the city is very, very complex, and at this point I don't even know if it's unpackable in the first place. But point being, if you're branded with an Indian name, speaking with a British accent in Calcutta, you're fucked.
Really?
Pretty much, yeah. So you're definitely ostracized from regular, Calcuttans, for lack of a better term, and it's an immediate label you get, and there is no chance you get to integrate until you've completely bent over backwards and start speaking, acting, and talking exactly like them. And that was my survival mechanism. I literally, so people talk, and there's this whole thing amongst homegrown South Asians about speaking with fake accents, which doesn't help. People actually do try to fake accents in order to sound posher. That actually is a fact. So, ironically, the first accent I learned to fake was an Indian one.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, just so I'd stop getting bullied. And it took me, it resulted in a speech defect down the line. I literally had, I would stammer. Well, not stammer, but I had like legit difficulties just speaking clearly. And then when I moved back to Europe, that helped a lot in kind of finding a little more clarity in the manner in which my diction actually sounds more authentic. And at this point, I'm guessing my accent's like a bit of a hybrid, like neutralish.
Same.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Where it's probably apparent that my base accent is more British than it is American. Well, definitely. I can't for the life of me speak with an American accent, even if I tried. But point being, like you, I really had to sign a contract with myself at some point saying, okay, I'm not going to start speaking with a Bengali or an Indian accent just because I'm scared of being bullied. And it was not an easy decision.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's so fascinating. I'm glad you shared that story. That was so...
Yeah?
Huh. Yeah. It's funny now, especially now that I don't worry about those things. Some people will say, oh, I can now hear your Nigerian accent when I say it because of certain words I pronounce. And I'm like, great, I'm glad you can hear it. Because before, I can always put on whatever between the accents and all that. But now sometimes when I just relax, I find that whatever bases my accents were based on are right there. But to your point earlier, one of the things that I do want always to caution people too is, and things that I fight against, and the reason I became even more vocal about certain social issues is I find, we both have the same colonial country, the UK is. Indeed. There's a lot of assimilation that people promote. And I'm not a fan of assimilation because I feel like with assimilation, it strips the individuality of people's cultures, right. And I experienced almost the reverse of you. Like you said, you were bullied for not having an Indian accent. I was bullied for having a Nigerian accent. And so, and I remember they think I'm lower class.
Right.
And I'm thinking, and then when you go and when you study and you look at different cultures, it's what is considered professional, for example, goes against the natural texture of hair or the types of clothing that represent your culture. And there's a quote unquote West and this, and I'm always thinking, wow, all these standards and norms we're creating seem to be so limited, and it's not allowing a lot of people to fully express themselves. And so, it was a big reason for me diving into more diversity, equity, and inclusion aspects, because as I was studying all these TCKs, I started to see, sometimes TCKs will ask themselves whether they have permission to be their passport country self in the country that they're posted into.
Bingo.
Yeah. And I'm like, whoa. Yeah. But then I thought, I went through that. But I pushed past it when I got out of my teens, though. It wasn't when I was in my teens. So I went through a lot of that growing up. Yeah.
Here's an idiotic question. How did you figure out what your natural diction eventually was?
Oh gosh, I don't even know if I still know what my national because when I'm really passionate about something and I'm yelling and I'm saying like, whoa, what is that, Tyle? I was like, I don't know, it came from somewhere. But the thing that I stopped doing was overthinking. There used to be a time in my life where before I walked into a room, I would be saying words out loud so that I could, it's like vocal practice, so I could get myself into a particular zone, and I would be enunciating. And I even went through a period where I was stammering a lot.
See, another thing we have common.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, you were saying yours. Yeah. So I started doing that, and so I just stopped worrying and getting inside of my head. And now, if I pronounce a word in a Nigerian accent or a word in an American accent, or I have the mix, it's me. Yeah. Like this is who I am. I'm not even trying to sound anyway anymore. And I think because I spent so much time practicing a lot of Americanish accents, a lot of that residue is with me.
And to be fair, you've been in New Yorker for a while now, over a decade.
Yeah, I've been in New Yorker for a while. Yeah. But what's so funny? When people tell me when they see me talk to my parents or Nigerian friends, they say, you sound different. And I'm not even aware of it. So they're like, oh, whoa, what were you doing there? I was like, I was speaking English. That didn't sound like English. I was like, what do you want me to say? Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, totally hear you. Well, to be fair, I've noticed I'm currently in a place called Goa in India, which is very cosmopolitan and has a history of being cosmopolitan for most of its time. And a lot of my friends, non-South Asian friends, and there is a large demographic here as well. It's always been very global. You'll be surprised to know they do the same. I noticed the other day, they'll speak to an Indian waiter in an Indianized accent, and it's not just so. And I know this is kind of edgy territory, but it's really because honestly, it's really the only way to get understood. If I spoke in the accent I usually do when I'm like really on my own, like mad at someone or something, that's when I sound the most British, by the way.
Gotcha.
Comically enough, if I spoke that way to like for lack of a better term, a local, they wouldn't understand me. It's as simple as that. So I have to kind of speak in a manner, because in a way, at the end of the day, I am at some level in a foreign environment, and I do have to adapt and communicate in a manner that's understandable for the people around me, right? That is kind of human nature too.
That's code switching.
Yeah. What I'm at this point really trying to investigate is at which point does it stop being healthy?
Well, I think you said it so spot on earlier. I think it's when you stop being yourself.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you will know this within yourself if you find yourself, if I don't sound like this, I'm not going to impress this person, or I'm going to lose an audience, and then then you got to start asking. Yeah, you got to start asking yourself, like, what are you doing it for? And so for me, my mission statement: use a difference to make a difference. I loved when I came up with that, because it finally, I was like, I'm just really all about differences. And so if you can't accept my differences, or if I can't accept other people's differences, it's a clue for me that I need to work on something. And so for me, it's really when you feel like you have to lose an aspect of yourself, or you're more afraid of what the repercussions of what other people say is. And I want to be careful here. I know you and I are being careful about this. I understand how it can be for survival. And some, bullying is real. I went through
bullying is real indeed.
Yeah.
You said it.
Emotional bullying. I'm talking about when you are able to make decisions for yourself, right? Yeah. And then you find yourself still going through that. That's when I find it's dangerous.
I guess so. So to summarize, I guess the hashtags here are fear and pretension.
Yeah. And always fight against assimilation. If anyone tells you that your natural hair texture, for example, is unprofessional. I fight against that. I grew up in an environment where that was repeatedly told to me. As a black man, they say, you don't grow your hair, your curls need to be straighter, all these things, your texture is too, rough. They used to call it kinky, and all these things. And then I internalized that myself. It was even practiced in some parts of Nigeria where, I went to boarding school, they'll tell you the same sort of thing. And then 2017, I started growing my hair. I was like, why did I even, what happened? Who told me not to grow my hair out in the first place? And then I just started listening. There's all these stories from colonization, or if you don't do this, you're going to lose a job opportunity.
Damn.
And then I said to myself, then I don't want to work in a place that doesn't accept my hair for my hair.
Oh, yeah.
But that's what I mean. Which comes with its own set of risks, by the way, right? You have to be able to deal with that. But that was, those moments are when I decided to be more vocal about certain things, because I'm like, so I can't grow part of myself or my body because it's not accepted. And I just chose not to accept it.
Very well summarized. Very well summarized. I'm sorry you had to go through that, by the way. That sounds pretty crappy.
Oh, yeah. No, it's been annoying. But you know what? Hopefully, we're on our way to unlearning that. Yeah.
Amen to that, brother. So we went pretty deep into the code switching aspect of being a third culture kid. So rewinding a little, to summarize, third culture kids, again, for my listeners, folks who grew up during the formative years in a culture other than that of their earlier generation. Now, here's something I want to get into with you, because a lot of time TCKs get mixed up with immigrants. And yes, it's true, a TCK can be an immigrant, usually will be one, but an immigrant isn't necessarily always a TCK.
Yeah. That's true.
Needless to say, I mean, everyone's welcome here. It's not, we're not dissing immigrants or something.
I'm an immigrant.
Exactly, so am I.
Yeah.
But it's important, I think, to also distinguish the differences in the challenges both face. Because I've always felt uncomfortable calling myself just a regular immigrant, because in a lot of ways, I didn't have to deal with a lot of challenges. An immigrant who it migrates to Europe in their adult life for the first time. I've lost my thread here. I didn't have to put up with those because I did grow up with European culture around me, and it was part of my upbringing as well. And that doesn't take away some of the challenges I did have to face as an immigrant as well. But it's not the same as when someone who's grown up or has been born in a specific environment all their life all of a sudden moves to a completely foreign environment as an adult. That is a very different experience than growing up with hybrid environments all around you and changing backdrops.
Yeah.
The reason I don't know. Damn, I feel like I'm doing most of the talking here.
No, this is good though. I like what you're bringing up here.
So what I'd really love to pick your brain on is how do you think these differences eventually pan out? What are the primary differences between actually spending your formative years in multiple environments that are different to your ancestry and moving to a foreign country as an adult, for example? Right.
Some of the things I've noticed, because there's a lot of disagreements amongst immigrants and TCKs, because a lot of immigrants are TCKs,
exactly.
And a lot of times they feel like that they're not being included in the conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah, the difference I've noticed is that with immigrants, it's usually one country that they move in, and it's more permanent nature. And with a lot of third culture kids, it's a transient nature. Every 2, 3, 4 years, every back and forth, or even just the back and forth nature of that. And so you keep going through different parts of different cultures and different things where you go there. And honestly, the older I've gotten, some of the things that I've started to understand, if you look at the Venn diagram of that, is you still need to understand your parents' cultures as well as your culture.
Exactly.
Even if you grew up in a family that tells you, like, speak English or speak Spanish or speak French, people will look at you mm-hmm. and they will like, whoa, that's your name? You don't speak this? Or why don't you understand this? Or that if something comes on TV and it's reflective of your parents' culture, or your background, or your heritage, you get that look, and it'll still be used against you. And so one of but the big difference is usually in the amount of countries. Then also just really understanding the politics of it, right? Immigrants have different set of rules. You have some people that are there because they're refugees, right? So they'll have a very different experience than someone who came from, I just decided to leave. I'm going to this country, right? But with refugees, they're opportunities. The parents have to start over. It's not the same neighborhoods usually. They might be coming from different backgrounds, and then there might be some stereotypes based on that. Now, if you come from another country that has a favorable relationship with the country and moving in, the novelty might be, you have a cute accent, but your accent might not be the type of accent that people make fun of. They'll just be like, I wish I could have your type of accent, right? I've seen that with maybe some British people coming to the America, or Americans going to the UK. And so I always reflect on the type of immigrant you are, because it really makes a difference. With the passports and the passport privilege, and then the visas you can get. And then on the TCK side, it's really about this idea of finding home, right? What is home? Sometimes people don't feel at home in places they technically should feel at home. And then sometimes where they want to feel at home, people don't accept them as home. Or
in worst case scenario, both.
Yeah, or both, right? And then, and then there might be this delayed, for some people, for some TCKs, delayed growth period where, you have a childlike experience in each of these areas because you're constantly just learning new things. And then maybe when you're in your 20s, 30s, you start wondering I don't know, what am I supposed to be at this moment? Who am I? And it's a delayed sense of awareness. And so, I've noticed that happen as well when you keep having your home shifted.
Do you think your relationship with travel has been different as a result of being a TCK too? Because there is this whole restlessness that's attributed to that upbringing as well. There are theories about how TCK struggle to settle, and I definitely am grappling to find to settle at this point. I'm not sure if it's just the TCK thing, but how's that part of the equation been for you? Because you seem pretty, you've been a New Yorker,
So, I was in New York for a long time now. I found the two answers where you have one on the other extreme where they can't stay in one place, right? They have to go after a certain amount of time in this clock. And for me, my first intentional move was New York City because it actually reminds me of my hometown, Lagos in Nigeria, which is
beautiful,
a transient city, where you can hear different languages and you hear a lot of people. And so for me, I needed to move to an environment where I felt like, even though I wasn't traveling as much, I felt like I could taste the diversity and see it.
Right.
And yes, you see, but for other people, they won't be able to do that, right? Some other people, it's different, right? That's one of the reasons why it's not a monolith. But I was restless in the town I was before here. It was a small town in Virginia, and I felt like I couldn't stay there any longer. I felt so trapped. And so for me, I came to a basketball game one time, one of my mentors here in New York City, and I felt alive, really alive. And I thought to myself, I don't know what I need to do, but I need to move here. So for me, that was something that woke me up. But I've seen in other TCKs where they're constantly moving. And then I've seen the flip where they don't want to move anymore. They just want to find a place to stay rooted in. So I don't know that there's a one-size-fits-all answer for that.
Probably not, but I can intimately relate. I've lived in a moderately small town for a large part of my tenure in Germany as well, and then it was very suffocating towards the end. Which is why pre-COVID, the last 6 years, I wasn't really living there. I was just juggling multiple bases in different parts of the continent. But it was pretty clear eventually, needless to say, by the time the pandemic hit, that was not a sustainable model anyways. But I know exactly what you're referring to. That feeling you probably feel in New York is exactly what I feel in London.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. London is another big... Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
it has been a childhood hometown of mine as well. There's that aspect, so there's all the memories. But apart from that as well, it's like, I make these. I remember back when Facebook was actually kind of cool. I remember, posting a status update. 20 years in Germany, and it's still like, where are you really from? 20 minutes in London, and the question I get is, where are you traveling, love?
Yeah, I can see that.
And I get a similar feeling in Berlin, which is my primary base in Germany now. It's it has quite a good deal of catching up to do. But then again, it's Central Europe. I doubt if it'll be, the mindset always will be slightly different, I think. But, time will tell.
Time will tell.
Which kind of is probably not the worst point to taper off gently into the next topic I want to pick your brain on, which is the manner in which you build a life for yourself in New York. You're a badass entrepreneur, but you also have an academic background. And correct me if I'm wrong, you're also a teacher. You're a professor now.
Professor, yes. Yeah.
Well, mad respect, brother. That is awesome. And having gone back to college myself now, I just started doing a master's degree again, which might go into like a PhD kind of thing. I'm confronted again with the points where academic and entrepreneurial approaches might conflict with each other every now and then.
True.
Is this an experience you've made as well? And what was your way to work around it?
Well, so my primary goal to working in academic institutions right now is to completely dismantle it. I'm a disruptor, right? So I like to dismantle systems of oppression and suppression. And I don't believe that a lot of the academics, and this is someone that has an MBA, I don't believe that a lot of academic institutions really teach or create enough learning opportunities for people to cope in today's world. Like, let's say mental health or financial literacy or, empathy, emotional intelligence, all these things that will allow you to actually, learn the hard skills. And so for me, and so that is always something I've been in contact with. When I was getting my MBA and I was launching my business, people thought I was outside of my mind. And so,
I so hear you. These could have been my words right now, man. I'm in the thick of it right now. Ironically, I'm also the master's students representative, so I'm also, I'm also a consultant for the system at this point.
Nice.
As a student. Yeah, but I noticed though, and I'd be super interested in your point of view. Though it's like, the folks I'm working with, the teachers, and my professor is super cool, super open, because he comes from a very unconventional background. So he's a musician, the kind who's worked with the likes of Radiohead, but he also has a PhD in theoretical physics. So it's a very hybrid approach you bring. So, and which is why it's very apparent from the very beginning that he has a broader mind, generally speaking. With the rest of the folks, I know their heart is in the right place. I know they want to be open-minded, but the systematic infrastructures they're dealing with are just, it's like they're made for a different zeitgeist altogether and just haven't had that update yet. Have you had a similar experience?
Yes, in some institutions, and some I've seen differences, right? So the thing that I've noticed with the next generation is the interests are very varied. A lot of people can build careers off of social media, and so if teachers don't adapt, they're not. A lot of academic institutions are like, wait, we got to figure out how to make sure we're not losing money, and so. One of the reasons I decided to be an adjunct professor in one of the schools I'm an adjunct at is because I got invited there to speak on my book, and then I saw students that looked like me. And so I thought I need to see if I can teach here so other students can see that this is a possibility for them, right? It's all Black and brown kids. And so, I pursued them for a little bit. It was so funny. I was like, I'm just, whenever you have a space, let me know. And so, I remember that after the first semester and the second semester ended, I got emails from students saying, I didn't know that it was possible to be this age and to do this here because I thought that I had to go in that job. And I always tell my students that if you find yourself finding your life passion in the middle of your degree, don't feel like you have to do anything other than your life passion. And so that's what I hope to represent. I have met a lot of great professors, though, who think like you and are really into reinventing teaching methods. But I've also met professors who are stuck in the theoretical elements. I went to school and had professors who maybe didn't have the experience in what they were teaching at, but felt so smug in their positions. And I thought that was always harmful because people can always see right through that.
How bitter a pill do you think it is for academic bodies to swallow the fact that they're kind of competing with social media at this point? How bitter a pill do you think that is for them to swallow?
Oh, I think a lot of people don't like it. I think because and they might have a point in some instances where if it feels shortcutty, right? You don't get to understand the foundation, right, of what it is. And to that point, yes, of course. I mean, I completely agree with that. You should have a strong base of that. But I think when you don't adapt, though, it becomes really dangerous because they've grown up even more than we did with this is all they know, right? Yeah. And so if you can't teach your thing in 3 minutes, 3-minute sound bites or all these things, and then keep them engaged enough to come back for more, that means you're not learning how to communicate with them. And so that's where I ultimately stand on that end, where you have to understand your audience and where they are in order to teach them.
And you're a fantastic example of social media can be a meaningful medium to reach your audiences with. And I mean, for my audiences, for my listeners, all of Tayo's links will be included in the episode notes. So make sure you go check out what I mean with that. It's almost like it's like constant bite-sized education. Subscribing to your feed.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
A little bit of dance lessons thrown into.
But honestly, that is I felt like I got freer. So I'll tell you, with my life, I was always taught that you need to focus. And I believe in specialists and generalists. I don't believe one is more. I'm more of a polymath, right? Or I like mastering several fields. But I was always forced to choose one. And so when I found the podcast and ability to use social media, for me, it was a gift because I was able to, be a professor, be a speaker, be a consultant, be a researcher, a writer, all these things that I always thought that I could be, but I was told that I couldn't because I had to choose one. Right. And so for me, it's great. And anyone that is a specialist, I think is great too. I think there's a beautiful element of having a depth of knowledge into something that is so amazing. And I also think there's a beauty in having a breadth of knowledge, right? The breadth and depth is good depending on all that. But I feel like we need to adapt to whatever style there is for people out there.
Bingo. I'm also wondering exactly how aware exactly academic bodies are of the fact that we're living in an age where, you could literally do a masterclass with Herbie Hancock online. Some of the biggest artists and practitioners of their field, researchers or artists or wherever, you don't have to wait for them to come do a guest lecture once in a 3-year degree. You could just go study with them directly online. That's what institutes are competing with. And I'm wondering exactly if they, actually realizing the implication of that same. At some point, in over the next few years, the very validity of a degree is going to be put under scrutiny in a manner that's never happened before in the history of time.
I think you're right. I think I subscribe to Masterclass.
Exactly.
I'm often surprised by the amount of knowledge is in there.
Right.
I'm like, wait, whoa, I can learn all this stuff?
Exactly. And quality stuff,
Yeah.
And sure, it won't give you a university degree, but like one of my professors actually said, at this point, it's almost like the only reason a university degree is valid is because someone's grandfather knows its name.
Oh, yeah.
Literally. And because, probably a bit of an oversimplification, but, can't help but help but wonder if there is some truth to it. So I'm really curious,
Yeah, I don't know myself, but we'll see.
And that being said, it is. You got to admit, though, it is sexy to be able to call yourself a professor, right?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I didn't know that it was, but you know what's so interesting? I do think there's an element of pride in it. Yes, I've noticed. It feels good saying I'm a professor. Imagine.
Yeah, I will. I'll come clean. I'd love to be able to call myself that. I don't know if I'm gonna make it to one, but I can imagine that is definitely valuable. I guess to be fair, in a world where anyone can be a quote unquote creator on social media, and that kind of credibility is also not to be underestimated. No,
it's not, and it's the way of the world. And unfortunately and fortunately, right? So if you have enough credibility, so for example, I will say, the fact that I have an MBA or being a professor can maybe allow me into different doors where I can then do a lot of what we talked about, right? So the reason I was saying I had an understanding of why being a professor was important to me is not only for the representation elements of it, but I hope to help redesign curriculums in the future, right? So that the curriculums can then adapt to the environment that we're talking about. But people wouldn't take me seriously if I wasn't a professor, right? They were like, okay, well, you don't know anything about the academic world. Why should we take you seriously? And so you got to, you put in the sweat equity, right? And, you have enough understanding of the landscape and you can show your proof of concept. Then you become more credible, if you will.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Before we taper off into the last topic, I want to pick your brain on. Could you tell us a little more for others like us who are juggling academic and entrepreneurial lifestyles? What's the one common goal both can help you attain?
Well, both of them are ultimately the goal is to be freedom of freedom to be able to be yourself. Ironically,
interesting.
I know. I think the more knowledge you have, you can sometimes create opportunities. And so with my entrepreneurship career, it's always been about creating platforms for others to share their stories and then, really dismantling any system of oppression and suppression. Mm-hmm. With the academic element of that, I want people to be able to really reflect on history and correct those elements of histories that have been, whether whitewashed or just flat out completely wrong. A lot of our history has been, whitewashed or erased due to colonization and all those things. And so for me, on the academic aspect of that, when you are able to trace at least an element of where you come from, there's a power that comes from that identity. And so for me, that's the academic aspect. If I can go into an environment and speak to the history of, Asia, Africa, Blackness, and all these things, and really give people resources to find a sense of self in that to me is as important as what I'm doing entrepreneurially, because a lot of other cultures have those, points of references, right? People would say they can go, I know Mozart, I know all this, but we don't talk enough about Indian or African artists or Nigerian artists or Ghanaian artists who were around before 1800 or 1900, because it's not a curriculum. Yeah. And it's just accepted that's how it is.
That is thankfully being talked about a lot at this point, and I'm very grateful for that. And because I've borne the brunt of it, I've borne the brunt of being forced to adhere to systems.
And you do a good job with that. You do a good job with that.
Cheers! I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that. It means a lot coming from you, and it's nice to have to have been able to live in an era where I've borne the brunt of it and seen the change and keep seeing the change, and have a chance to contribute to that.
Yeah.
This is a good time to talk about my last topic I want to pick your brain on, which is Black Lives Matter 2022. Where do we stand?
So when I think of Black Lives Matter, I always think about the movement. I know that the organization is a little different, but the movement itself,
yes, please,
definitely still a lot of work to be done in terms of recognizing how Blackness is often demonized. I've definitely seen progress, though, in terms of how more and more people are willing to have the conversations amongst themselves. I saw recently, there's something called the Crown Act in the United States. It's a little sad that it's taken this long for us to think about that. But Crown Act is basically, this idea of people not policing black hair. And it's now passing through, the different elements of government here. But Crown stands for create a respectful and open world for natural hair. And so conversations like that, conversations about art, a lot of companies are being now made to reflect on opportunities they're creating when they're recruiting people, right? So we're seeing more of that, but my hope is that it moves beyond a trend, right? Now it's not as it's sexy to do that, right? If you don't do it, you're part of the problem. But I want people to be able to do it because they know it's right and it's something that should be done consistently. Indeed. I have hope that it will continue, but we're still in that sort of honeymoon phase, I believe, and where a lot of companies are doing what they feel like they need to do. But unfortunately, I have come across a few companies who, as we're moving back into the, hopefully on the back end of COVID, they've just decided not to stand as firm with their proclamations of creating more opportunities for Black lives. And then the last part of that is obviously the policing aspect and what that is. And so depending on what state you are, and depending on which country you are, there are reforms in the process of being passed, and then there's a huge amount of resistance to the reforms. Indeed. And so the ultimate goal, though, is not that police isn't needed. It's more that, Black people aren't being killed for things that they shouldn't be killed for.
More power to that.
Yeah.
I want to address an extremely nuanced aspect to the movement, which I know very few people are qualified to really comment on, the manner in which you are. What's interesting is, and I remember in our last podcast, we specifically addressed racial bias. Most of the podcast was centered around it. I was talking about, being an ally is not about being colored. You can be as good an ally without necessarily, well, at least, in your own way, in your own authentic way. And also the fact that, not all colored people are necessarily an ally. You don't have to be white to be racist either. The point I'm getting to is it's interesting. May I just quote a random example, which I haven't wrapped my head around? So a couple of weeks back, I found out this specific venue in Germany. By the way, Germany owes the Black Lives Matter movement big time, especially in 2020. It was the first time the POC of Germany finally actually had the chance to really be open about their experiences.
Yes.
And the government actually did take action. It was the first, basically 2020 marks the first time that Germany owned its racism after the World War II.
Wild.
Yeah. Anyway, so reverting there. So this venue apparently gave the singer of a band an ultimatum. The singer was white and he had dreadlocks, to cut his dreadlocks off or they'd cancel their concert. And I found that confusing because one, contrary to, and I did the research on this after a few of my friends told me to, apparently Scandinavians have had dreadlocks as well throughout history. So for the longest time, I thought, having dreadlocks in itself is probably, not okay if you're not white, if you're not colored, sorry, or have a link to that culture. But it turns out, a lot of Scandinavian cultures have had dreadlocks as well. And I'm not quite privy to how they eventually panned out. But what's the solution there? What's going on there?
It's black hair is always a touchy subject. Gosh, I'm trying to think of how to handle this because I don't have enough information. So you're saying that the white singer was asked to cut his hair or lose an opportunity?
Yeah, basically he wouldn't be allowed to perform at the venue if he didn't cut his dreads off.
Growing up, I was always thought that when you have your hair twisted in locks, or when your hair naturally goes that way, it's one of the most empowering things, and then people taking that away from you is problematic. Mm-hmm. Now, what the only thing I would say is the only time I've ever seen it as a problem is when people do it without understanding the history of it. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I've ever necessarily seen any problem with people, co-opting different hairstyles with flippantly without acknowledging it, and then them not facing any backlash from that. So in this instance, I don't know if he pays homage to the history, mm-hmm. if he has a Scandinavian root, mm-hmm. if there's a reason he's doing it. I have no idea if there's a reason, and if there's a reason he does it, and it really is to the Vikings and he's paying homage to that, then I don't know that we can tell him what his story is. The only time I've ever had a problem with anything is if someone takes something from a black culture without paying homage to it, and then takes it as their own. But outside of that, I've often been more lax on those type of issues, just because I think we can get into a very, very tricky nature where we're saying we can't borrow as many things as we can from different cultures, right? And we can't appreciate certain things. Yeah. Now, so that's why for me, it's hard for me to answer that question, because I really don't know him and what his story is. Mm-hmm. But I will say the problem often lies in the appreciation and co-opting spectrum, right? Some people just do things without knowing the history of it, and some people will accept things from certain cultures that they don't accept from black cultures, and then it becomes problematic. It's the same sort of thing as when black people have worn braids for a long time, and then all of a sudden a white person wears a braid, and then she's the front face of the magazine, and they say this is a new style that is now working. Yeah. So that's usually where I have a problem with things like that. But outside of that, I'm usually more like, so you're going to find people that disagree with me, though, TL. Many people listening with this be like, I don't agree with what Ty was saying. I feel like it should never be done. And for me, I often look on the appreciation and the co-opting spectrum of it, and seeing, okay, this person understands the history and is paying homage, and it's not just doing it for a trend.
Yeah, I understand. Well, I'll be completely honest with you, Ty. I would tend to be biased against a white person with dreads. Generally, I have been. I'll own it. Until I found out the history of Scandinavian cultures and dreads too. See, that was my ignorance, and it was time for me to.
We all have those things.
Exactly. That was mine. It was like, whoa, I didn't know about this at all. I thought dreads were only a thing Indian Sadhus did and people in Africa did. People of African origin, we're oversimplification here.
Yes.
Me, I had to eat a bit of a humble pie when I read about that. So, and it threw me off because I realized, well, I've been biased against a certain demographic in my very own way, and that there is probably a little more to investigate here than I realized. More to investigate,
exactly. Yeah. So I'm doing a Google search now, and there are stories, and there are competing stories about historical records. Vikings mm-hmm. kept. They did braids and locks. So mm-hmm. I will have a better answer for you after I've done my research. However, the thing that I always stand on is whenever you find yourself profiting off another culture that has been historically marginalized, mm-hmm. I always have a problem with that if you don't give the right credit to it, because as we've discussed in the history books, many people would just accept it as the person that co-opted the culture, as opposed to paying homage to, like, hey, wait, this actually comes from Nigeria, and let's actually create more opportunities for more Nigerians to send us, create a trade route for this, as opposed to this. But in the past, we'll colonize it, and then we'll take it and we'll make it ours, and then we'll never. Exactly. And so that's why it's always tricky and touchy for me, and I'm sure some people are like, chill, but I'm like, nah, I mean, look at history.
Yeah, indeed, I totally get that. Yeah, I had a very different kind of experience where an extremely well-respected musician was publishing a book based on some Indian literature, even though the gentleman, as credible and fantastic a musician this person is, had never been to India, and he ended up putting, or the graphic designer or the publishing company put the picture of an Indian deity on the cover, which was completely out of context. It had nothing to do with any other content. And
wow.
And I wrote to him directly saying, I'm very sorry, but this is cultural appropriation. This is like me writing a book on Bach and putting a picture of Jesus on it for no reason, or something.
Oh my God, that's such a good example.
Right. And his knee-jerk reaction though was more like I'm trying to pay tribute to the culture. And I'm saying all of this with due respect, because this is a gentleman I have a great deal of respect for. But it was triggering for me, dude. I just told you I am, this is my ancestry. I just told you it's cultural appropriation. Why is it that you feel confident enough to just have refuted me in the manner you did? And it was triggering. And to the gentleman's credit, on the record, that cover was changed. So I'm really glad I brought it up. It cost me a week's night of sleep. Because it was one of those very intense conflicts where this is someone I really respect a lot as an artist and musician, but also successful people are not perfect.
No, none of us are. I hope we get to a place. I've never been a fan of cancel culture.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there are people that definitely need to be punished for horrible things. Yeah. But I think honestly, all of us are hypocrites.
Absolutely.
And we need to create more space for dialogue and opportunity to talk. I'm glad that turned out that way for you.
Thank you. I just wish it wouldn't have cost me this week's sleep. These things usually.
That's a long time. Yeah.
I know, right? Yeah, it was intense. But then that's something you're intimately familiar with, and I'm pretty sure, those conflicts have bin challenging in your journey as well. So mad respect.
Yeah. And I think the only way I know how to handle it is be honest with you. I made a mistake, or I used to think this and now I think this. And, hopefully I move on. And if people choose not to accept it, that's also fine. Everybody's at a different stage in their journey. But I think we all need to practice that level of vulnerability and a level of acceptance for people's growth.
Beautiful. That is a fantastic thought to end. Not end, but this conversation is never really going to end. I'm sure we're going to be talking soon again. But for now, thank you, Tayo. It's always an absolute pleasure and an absolute honor to engage with you.
Likewise.
Before I let you go, I want to ask you again. We've asked you once already, but it's been a while. It's been 2 years since the last time we asked you. So let's ask you again. If you were in front of a sacred fire right now, what would you want to throw into it?
A sacred fire? What would I want to throw into it?
What would you want to burn away?
Burn away? Oh, gosh. I would want to burn away. I'm trying to think. I would want to burn away the part of myself that doesn't accept the greatness of who I am.
Beautiful. You nailed it, man. You killed it again. You killed it last time too.
Yo, you put me on the spot. I love it. I love it.
I put you on the spot, but you killed it, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, you killed it last time as well. So yeah, and I'm not surprised. Thank you. That deeply resonates, as does most of, pretty much all of what you said.
No, this is good. It's a pleasure talking to you. I'm so happy and incredibly proud of everything you've been doing. So,
cheers, brother. That means a lot coming from you.
Anytime. Yeah. So.
I can only throw that back. You're an absolute brother, and you're an inspiration, and I'm a fan. And you've had a very, very major role to play in my life, and the manner in which I've gained clarity on some of the most important themes in my life, and I really mean that. I mean, it's funny. It's funny. It's taken me like a decade to even realize. You run into people, and and you never realize the kind of impact they're going to have on your life sometimes. And especially 10 years later, we still haven't met 3D, which is ridiculous.
I know, right?
You're like an old friend where I feel safe enough to talk about themes which are as vulnerable as it gets, and yet here we are. We still haven't managed to meet in 3D, so hope we can get to change that sometime soon.
Man.
On that note, gratitude from the bottom of my heart for listening to the very end. Please consider taking a minute to subscribe to our show so you know when the next episode is out. This is a labor of love, one I hope snowballs into one that's sustainable in its attempt to support independent thought and authentic relating. And having you as a regular member of our audience is what makes that a realistic prospect. Much love, and talk soon. Just another voice